In the past 3 years, hundreds and sometimes thousands of people every day arrive in Greece in small boats. They come from Turkey, and most of them claim that they are fleeing the civil war in Syria. But let's take a closer look into when did this start and who is helping them. The civil war in Syria started in 2011. Millions fled the country and sought asylum in neighboring countries, mainly in Lebanon, in Jordan and Turkey. Some tried to leave Turkey and get to Greece with small boats. The right-wing government of Greece had given unofficial orders to the Coast Guard to push back the boats coming from Turkey, and sometimes migrants were treated badly. As a result, most of the millions of Syrians that were in Turkey did not try to cross over to Greece. Because the journey was expensive and dangerous, but mainly because they already had found asylum in a peaceful country with the same culture, same climate, and same religion. Until 2015, less than 100,000 people every year tried to reach Europe for asylum. Most of them were African Muslims, and they came into Europe through Spain or Italy. Back in 2013, 3,300 Jews left France and moved to Israel. Another 7,000 left in 2014, that's twice as many, and in 2015 Israel hoped the number to double again and reach 15,000. French Jews were leaving France because they were afraid, due to the rise of terrorist attacks and anti-Semitism, which mainly originates from French Muslims. The tipping point for Europe was on January 2015, when a new government was elected in Greece, a radical left socialist government that included many communists, Antifa sympathizers, and social justice warriors that support open borders. The next day, the Greek Coast Guard received new orders, and I know that from first hand. The orders were to help the incoming boats to reach the Greek islands, and the Coast Guard had to obey to these orders. As soon as the cold winter was over, which prevented the trip for small boats, and the first boats for 2015 arrived, a surprise was waiting for them. The men of the Coast Guard were friendly now, and on the coast, members of NGOs were waiting for the migrants, providing them dry clothes, food, maps, and instructions on how to reach the rich European countries like Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and Sweden. The news traveled quickly to Turkey, and every day more boats arrived. Meanwhile, according to Bloomberg, Israel has a demographic problem, and European Jews could help address Israel's demographic challenges if they move to Israel. In September 2015, an Israeli NGO arrives in Lesbos Island in Greece. Their name is IsraAid. Until then, I always thought that Jews and Muslims were enemies, and suddenly I see Israelis arriving in Greece in order to help Muslims come into Europe. This looked really strange, so I looked up into who funds this NGO. In this screenshot from September 2015, we see IsraAid had 44 donors. The vast majority of the donors are Jewish organizations, but one caught my eye. The State of Israel, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let's go briefly back to 2013, where we read that asylum problems make for an unwelcome new home, and the smugglers charge 2,000 per head. Here is another article from 2013 in which the smuggler promised he would take them there for 2,500 per head, so the price was between 2,000 and 2,500. Jump forward now to November 2015, after IsraAid is already 2 months in Greece, and the price dropped to half. According to this article, the trip usually cost a minimum of $1,000. So we can see now why the arrivals started to go up during 2015 and caused the so-called migrant crisis. Because the leftist government of Greece had opened the sea borders wide open and was inviting everyone in. Because NGOs like Israel Aid were providing a welcoming hug with dry clothes, food and instructions, and that drove more people to come. And because more customers created competition between smugglers and lowered the prices in half. And millions from the Middle East, South Asia, Africa, even from Latin America responded. On January 2016, this video surfaced. And this is what triggered me back then to look deeper into the role of Israelis in the so-called refugee crisis in Europe. According to the Allgemeiner, an American Jewish newspaper, anti-Semitism rises in Europe as a result of the spread of radical Islam and the refugee and migrant crisis. And according to Breitbart, Jews continue to leave France for Israel in record numbers. Anti-Semitism and terrorism fear drive exodus. Vox reports that 95% of these attacks are carried out by youths of African and specifically North African origin.
In the world today, there are 4.6 million Syrian refugees, along with millions of others fleeing their homes in the war-torn Middle East.
Meanwhile, Israel continues to operate on Lesbos, helping thousands of Muslims to enter Europe every day. They are so proud of this project that they presented it at the AIPAC conference on March 2016.
We protect them, feed them, clothe them, and comfort them. We are Israelis. As Israelis, we draw on our own history of tragedy and triumph to help the biggest wave of displaced persons in Europe since our grandparents searched the earth for refuge.
AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or, as they say, America's pro-Israel lobby.
Sometimes, thousands of people arrive in just one day.
At the end of 2016, the Jewish Agency for Immigrant Absorption announced that only 27,000 Jewish immigrants arrived in Israel in 2016, compared to the 31,000 who arrived in 2015. And Israel really wants to get as many as possible. Do you remember the Bloomberg article about Israel's demographic problem? So on January 2017, 1,500 rabbis signed a letter calling for more refugees in the US. And by refugees, they mean Muslims. 1 month later, on February 2017, they organized a Jewish rally for refugees in New York to protest Trump's so-called Muslim ban. A newspaper in Israel reports Jewish rally for refugees in New York invokes struggle of Holocaust survivor grandparents. Overlooking Ellis Island, thousands of Jews gathered to demand that Muslim refugees be let into the US. Those same people who sent Jews back to the Third Reich never left, said Representative Keith Ellison. Isn't that the same Keith Ellison that is the deputy chair of the Democratic National Committee? who happens to be a Muslim and an Antifa supporter? He recently tweeted to Donald Trump a selfie of him holding the Antifa handbook. Let's go quickly back to Israel. Why the world needs open borders more than ever, and why Israelis especially should be fighting for them. If there is a simple practical lesson to be learned from the Holocaust, it's the need for open borders. Large swaths of the world are going to become uninhabitable in the decades ahead. The northern countries will probably suffer less from changes in the climate. They will have no choice. They will have to take in refugees, and plenty of them. In far greater numbers than they are now doing, possibly even hundreds of millions of people who will migrate to the north. Meanwhile, in the US, the 1,500 rabbis that support welcome refugees just became 2,000. Israel is continuing to help Muslims come into Europe through Greece, and 9 Jewish rabbis and 3 Muslim leaders from the US visited Greece to inspect the operations. In this screenshot from June 2017, we see that Israel now has 48 donors, 4 more than last time, with the State of Israel, Ministry of Foreign Affairs still included. But 2 months later, on August 2017, we see only 47 Israeli donors. Only one was deleted, the State of Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Did they really stop supporting Israel after so many years? Maybe they just removed the state from the donors page because it was causing suspicions. Meanwhile, the Syrian army claims finding made in Israel weapons in ISIS hideouts. Some conspiracy theorists claim that Israel secretly supports ISIS, but there isn't any solid evidence. The Israeli Air Force attacks weapons facilities of the Syrian army. This attack practically helps ISIS, but this is still not solid evidence. This gets even weirder. Israel's defense minister claimed that ISIS apologized to Israel after opening fire on an Israeli unit. Yalon said, ISIS has since said sorry for the incident. A lot of weird coincidences. Israeli weapons found in ISIS hideouts. Israeli Air Force bombing the Syrian army. ISIS apologizing to Israel. It almost looks as if Israel and ISIS are allies. Meanwhile, Israel threatens with deportation or jail time thousands of African refugees. While another US Jew who went to Greece during summer to volunteer wrote this wonderful article. What I learned in the second largest refugee camp in Greece. Lily Greenberg Cole is a political science student at UC Berkeley and is president of Bears for Israel.
In 2015, almost 8,000 Jews left France. In 2016, another 5,000 fled. And over the last decade, more than 40,000 have packed their bags. That's almost 10% of the Jewish population in France.
Russia Today reports that the Jewish community in France says it's facing increased levels of violence.
French Jews are fleeing the Paris suburbs to escape a rise in anti-Semitism. Many families have decided to quit France altogether.
Anti-Semitism is alive in France. And we finish this report with this news from Israel. Israel will pay $9,000 to any civilian willing to help deport asylum seekers by force. So what did we learn today? First, that the war in Syria started in 2011 while the big refugee crisis in Europe started 4 years later in 2015. That happened mainly for 4 reasons. First reason, the newly elected government opened the sea borders. Second reason, NGOs like IsraAid offered help to the incoming migrants. Third reason, when the word got out that in Greece there was a welcoming environment by the government and the NGOs, more migrants decided it was worth to make the trip. And the fourth reason is that more customers created competition between smugglers that lowered the prices and made it easier for even more migrants to come to Europe. We also learned that the State of Israel and Jews from the US helped IsraAid in Greece. That 2,000 rabbis in the US lobbied for the US to accept more Muslims. That Israel has a demographic problem and needs Jews from Western countries to solve it. That as the number of Muslims in Europe rises, anti-Semitism also rises and pressures European Jews to move to Israel, and this helps to solve the Israeli demographic problem. And while Israel helps Muslims reach Europe, and while rabbis lobby for bringing more Muslims in the US, African refugees are deported from Israel. It is obvious that the Israeli government and plenty of rabbis and Jewish organizations share part of the responsibility for the recent wave of Islamization of Western countries, and Jews in the West are victims of these actions too. This video is in no way against Jews. It is exposing facts about the role of Israel and of some Jewish organizations that work against the interests of Jews who live in Western countries. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found this information useful, then please share it with your friends, give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment.